I'm Mariette DiCristina, and I'm the Dean of Boston University's College of Communication. I'm also an alum of COM and the parent of a recent BU grad. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's COM Talks event, Storytelling for Social Good. It's not an exaggeration to say that stories can change the world. The best ones influence our beliefs, inspire us to make an impact, and illuminate what it means to be human. Communication can ignite the changes we wish to see, and no story is ever too small, whether it's told through a film, a speech, a news report, or even an Instagram post. In this COM Talk, we'll be chatting with 3 of our alums, all expert storytellers for social good. This event is being recorded and will be available later on COM's website. Please, when you're ready to ask questions, use the Q&A box instead of the chat function. It's at the bottom of your screen, and type in the questions anytime you like. There'll be plenty of time to address them a little later in the presentation. Now it's my real pleasure to introduce our speakers. Lauren Bader is freelance copywriter and creative strategist who is dedicated to helping build and grow cause-driven brands. She also founded and runs Allworthy, a disability inclusion nonprofit that creates children's books and other educational programs to spread awareness and spark conversations, normalizing and celebrating our human differences until everybody belongs. Welcome to you, Lauren. It's great to have you. Now let's say hello to Scott Cameron, who's executive producer of Sesame Workshop's international social impact content. This includes Alan Simsim, a local version of Sesame Street designed for children affected by displacement in Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Scott also oversees production of local versions of Sesame Street in South Africa, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and as well as a new play-to-learn video series for children and families affected by the Rohingya refugee crisis. He's been working in children's educational media since the mid-1990s, when he developed content and curricula for international versions of Sesame Street in Japan, China, Russia, and Mexico. He is a 2-time Emmy Award-winning producer of PBS's The Electric Company, for which he also has served as writer and director of education. Scott's written also for numerous children's shows, including Curious George, The Ollie and Moon Show, and Norman Pickle Stripes for Universal Kids. Welcome to you.
Thanks so much. Happy to be back at my alma mater.
So glad you're here, Scott. Now let's say hello to Amy Siegel, who's Director of Strategic Initiatives and Programming at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She leads a team of content producers, technical directors, and social media experts in developing and marketing dynamic digital education programs, leadership conversations, and fundraising events, as well as partnerships to reach new audiences. She started her career as a political producer in Boston with WHDH and New England Cable News before joining the election and survey unit at CBS News. In 2000, Amy moved to the Advertising and Public Affairs Agency, GMMB. There she managed global and national campaigns for some of the world's most recognizable foundations, corporations, and government agencies, focusing on global health and development, maternal and child health, education policy, and national service. So glad to have you here, Amy.
Thanks so much.
Now let's say hello to our moderator. Edward Downs is Associate Professor of Public Relations here at the College of Communication. And he gained a wide breadth of full-time communication experience working throughout the corporate, government, and nonprofit sectors for more than 10 years throughout metropolitan Washington, D.C. He's held positions as Public Relations Director, Marketing Representative, Special Events Producer, Campaign Organizer, Personnel Specialist, Communications Consultant, and Researcher. Among his past employers were the United States Congress, national trade associations, and large and small businesses headquartered in the nation's capital. He holds a broad view of public relations, education, promotes interdisciplinary scholarship, and has taught a variety of courses here at COM, from the theoretical to the practical. Since designing COM's public relations for nonprofit settings course upon his arrival here back in 1997, several hundred of our alumni have taken it, some of whom, no doubt, are in today's audience. Welcome, Eddie. And now I'll turn things over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean DiChristiana. Thank you so very much. And aren't we lucky today to be with such a panel? I mean, you all are great, and I admire you and your purpose in your work. And you're here, and you're going to educate us. We're going to have a good hour presentation. I know it's going to go well. I want to share with you as a very quick shout out to the dean, if I may. You know, this has been a trying time for all of us, especially for a brand new executive such as the dean who comes in and runs things. And I'll tell you that from my perspective looking in, despite COVID, we carry on very, very well as we are today. So thank you, Dean DiChristiana, for your leadership and your team's leadership, a team to whom you always give lots of credit. I was thinking about this morning, and when I've moderated panels before, one time I didn't say anything and somebody said, Eddie, you should say something. So I figured what I'd try to do, if this is okay, is take maybe just about 5 or 7 minutes and share 3 thoughts with you. After we share those 3 thoughts, we're simply going to look at a quick overview of nonprofit public relations and storytelling. And then really the majority of our time is spent with our panelists, most of whom are more accomplished and definitely smarter than I. So we'll get to those guys relatively quickly. Here are my 3 thoughts that I'd like to share with you, and they came up to me this morning. The first one, I asked my girlfriend of many years, who's a physician for the homeless, do you think it's okay if I bring this up with the group today? I'm not sure. And she said, probably it's okay. So let me share this with you. You all are members of COM and the alumni, and you probably remember Shelton Hall, which is now Keelashan. And I lived in Shelton Hall for 11 years with the students in the faculty and residence program. And like an old school guy, I guess, I would walk over to 7-Eleven across the street in Kenmore Square, and I would buy newspapers. And over 11 years, I developed, I'd like to say, if I can give myself a compliment, deep relationships with a number of the homeless folks who were there. And what I found, what was interesting is that, I love these guys. And I think of all the people who I've hugged when we used to hug each other, those were some of the most rewarding hugs, in part because no one wanted to touch them. So it was a beautiful experience. I want to share with you too that it was a great pleasure to buy them food and to get to know them. And I'll share with you the sad part, and that is that 5 of the folks with whom I used to interact are now dead. They've died. And what that reminded me of is the very important work that nonprofit practitioners do, because they're dealing oftentimes with life and death and purpose. And it was largely the nonprofit arena that took care of the homeless people as best they could. So I asked Eileen if I should share names, and she said, don't share names because that's confidential, but just know that and keep in your thoughts the good folks in front of 7-Eleven still today, as of yesterday, in Kenmore Square, living on the street and doing that. That was the first thought. The second thought I had was that, I don't know, it's a privilege to be at Boston University. I'm not just saying that because the dean, my boss's boss, is here. I say it all the time. I can't believe I'm here sometimes doing this work. And the privilege of teaching a nonprofit public relations class is just a joy. But what I found increasingly in the students over the years, when I ask them what they're looking for, increasingly it's not money. It's not even fame. I only say anecdotally, do you know what they probably want? They want purpose. They want purpose in their life, and they want purpose in their careers. And I think that the nonprofit environment and storytelling offers that. The other thing I'll give you an example is we're working with a client now in Haiti, and because of COVID, we were able to do this through Zoom. And I'm encouraging the students to think not just about an assignment. We'll give them a grade and they can get a grade and maybe it'll be too high. That's really not it, because they have the opportunity, as all of us do, to make a significant difference in the world through our work as a nonprofit practitioner. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, in one in which people still starve to death. So it's an intense environment. And the students this semester, through their work, will go out and try to do good. So speaking of doing good, there were 2 quotes that came to my mind. The first is from Mahatma Gandhi. And I thought that was pretty good. He's a pretty neutral guy. But he said this. I was in India. I was a keynote speaker at a conference in India, and I got to, see his rasham and stuff. And it was really interesting. This is his quote. It's only one line, but I'd like to share it with you because I think it will situate our time today. Here it is. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service to others. And when I think about Scott's work and Amy's work and Lauren's work, it's about service to others. It's about purpose. So again, I thank you for your work. I was also conscious on our webinar today that there would be a number of people who are leaders now or who have become leaders in the nonprofit field. So there was a quote about leadership that I'm going to put in the nonprofit context that I think might be worthwhile to help us to situate our remarks today. And it's simply this: leadership in the nonprofit, I put it in the nonprofit, is about finding your unique blueprint and expressing that courageously, confidently, and vulnerably. Isn't that a nice quote? I mean, it kind of captures what we're here and what we're doing. You know, the other thing is that I'm conscious of the audience, and, you know, what we think of the nonprofit sector, oftentimes you tend to think, well, it's a soup kitchen or something such as that. And those are imperative places, imperative places. It's where the rubber meets the road and where pretentiousness falls and humanity begins. But there's all sorts of organizations, some of which you may work in. There are certainly fine arts entities, there are museums, there are hospitals, youth and social senior agencies, healthcare entities, trade and professional associations, unions, religious organizations, higher education establishments, chambers of commerce, advocacy groups, etc. They're all right there. But here's what our three panelists have in mind: Lauren and Scott and me. All of them tell stories for the good, even though each is working in a different type of nonprofit. So for example, Lauren builds brands that help people. She builds brands that help us to create and share stories, all for the good. Scott does so through providing international social impact content that help and create stories, all for the good. And Amy does brilliant work in her work, providing thoughtful, strategic initiatives and programming that's helping to create and share stories, all for the good. So with that said, I'm going to take myself out of the picture a little bit and hopefully now turn it over to our panelists. But I'd like to pose a question to them, and I'll give you full disclosure on this. I had the privilege yesterday of having a conversation with each of these busy professionals, and they're so, just like, I don't know, when I went to dinner, I thought I'm so lucky to have these people, to know these people, to interact with these people. And I suspect, I'm going to be a little bit presumptuous, that each of them has found some special purpose in their life through the work that they do. Again, reflecting on what the student said earlier, I want purpose in what I'm doing. Not all, but some, but many. So I'm going to ask a quick question of each of the three panelists, and then time permitting, I'll do a follow-up question, or we'll go right to the webinar and begin to answer your questions. I'd like to get to the webinar questions certainly by 3:25 or 3:30 or so. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? You okay with that? So we'll take care of that. Here's a question that I'd like each of the panelists to answer. Lauren and Scott and Amy, if you would, my new heroes. It's a simple question, but it's also a profound question. When you think of the power of storytelling, and you think of the power of stories that in the 1960s, in large part through nonprofit practitioners, changed the society and changed the culture when it came time to civil rights. In the 1970s, with the women's rights movement, the stories that changed that and changed our culture. Now we have new movements, whether they be LGBTQ or whatever the case may be, but we're changing the culture. These nonprofit people aren't necessarily selling more automobiles, but through their work, they're changing the culture, and I think all for the better. So with that said, my question is this. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Lauren, you're first up. May I ask you first? Is that okay? Okay, here's the question that I'm gonna ask everybody. What comes to mind when you think of, quote, storytelling for social good?
It's a really good question. Sorry, everything on my table is just about to fall off. So, I mean, what comes to mind for me is just empathy. The fact that we all know what social good is and what needs to happen. It's how that social change is going to happen. And I mean, it might be because I went to school for advertising, but to me, social change, a big part of it is just being able to understand what needs to change and being able to see it, especially when it deals with people or even animals, being able to see it from their point of view. So, I mean, a big part of what my nonprofit does is it helps people understand disability and talk about it in ways that they have grown up thinking it's not okay to talk about. They've grown up saying, oh, don't ask people about their disabilities, don't stare. Whereas that's just creating more fear. And the more that we can just understand one another, the more understanding our world can be.
Lauren, thanks so much. I was reflecting on your answer. And the interesting thing about folks with disabilities, I think your website said 1/4 of the population has a disability. Did I get that right?
Yeah, in the US.
In the US. And when we think about the homeless, it's the same thing. The point is that you can leave COM, walk down the street, and see the folks who are homeless in front of 7-Eleven. And we can see during our life today, folks who have disabilities who we may or may not even be conscious of, or conscious of the disability. Would you reflect just for one more minute on that and talk about your work, some of the creative strategies that yes, that's right, some of the creative strategies that you used, particularly in your freelance work, as it relates to making us aware that this population is here and present and part of us, and we're part of them, and I'm sorry to be trite, but I'm sorry to be profound, but we're brothers and sisters working together with each other. So could you offer a little bit of thought on that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, a little bit of backstory. I went to school for advertising to be a copywriter at Income, and I graduated and I was like, I'm gonna work for a big agency, I'm gonna do cool ads. And within the first year, I was finding that the only projects I found meaningful weren't the big ads, it was the ads that actually make an impact. So I've started to transition into working more with smaller brands and just people who are brands I can make an impact for and who are making an impact. So whether it's an environmental nonprofit or I'm working with a client now who one of their 3 employees has Down syndrome, and their whole message is, yeah, we create high quality bags, but also we provide meaningful employment to people with disabilities, regardless of if it's a nonprofit or just a company with a good message behind it. That story needs to be told. And those are often the companies and nonprofits with fewer resources to tell that story professionally and to tell it well. So I think it's so important to be able to tell those stories and be able to just reach more people who might not even know that this cause needs to be addressed.
Lauren, thanks so much. And thank you for your work. Thank you very, very much. I want to make sure I give a shout out to a bunch of nonprofit students who are taking my class now and listening to you and saying, listen to Lauren, don't listen to me. That's my advice. And so I'm going to move just a little ahead and say probably the same advice. If I may, Amy, are you okay to go next with that question? I'll repeat the question. And again, I'm going to ask my students to listen to the wisdom that you might share. And here's what it is again. What comes to mind when you think about storytelling, when you think about, quote, storytelling for social good? How about that, Amy?
Sure. I also just want to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I'm so thrilled. I loved my time at COM. And so shout out to 11C in Warren Towers. Okay, so for me, it's about humanizing complex topics and helping people find themselves in issues and giving them a reason to care about it. Maybe there's a disparity, maybe there's a community issue, maybe there's a lack of awareness, to Lauren's point, where people don't look like me or have the same problems, or do they? Are they talking about it? Is there enough exposure? And you know, this all ladders to, can we make the world a better place? Can we help solve problems? I started my career after graduating from COM in broadcast journalism, and I was sure that that was going to be my contribution, introducing viewers to topics that they wouldn't necessarily be exposed to, because I could go to a place and bring that information to them. But having covered politics, it also helped me form my own opinions about issues and candidates that I wanted to work on behalf of. And so by then moving into being a consultant and a strategic communicator, that gave me the opportunity then to take the skills that I knew of how the media world worked and put them to good use on behalf of issues that I didn't feel like had enough exposure, or a void in our society that needed to be addressed, and provide that context of humanizing complex topics, helping people see themselves in that topic and why it's important.
Thanks so much, Amy. As in the academy, it gets me crazy if someone says, I can't keep up with a professor. And I'm thinking, well, the professor's not keeping up with you. Because part of that process is as you describe, humanizing complex issues. Let me ask you this, if I may, as a follow-up. When you're humanizing complex issues, how do you do that without losing the richness of those issues? Do you know what I mean? In other words, these issues are primary and they're very, very complex. How do you get across your messaging simply enough so the audience will interpret it correctly, but also concretely enough so that you're not losing the richness? May I ask you that question?
Of course. For me, and when I was counseling clients, it was the balance. No numbers without stories, no stories without numbers. However, there's always that pitfall of oversimplifying an issue by putting it all on the shoulders of one human story. And we run into that a lot with the work that I do at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. 6 million is a ginormous number. How do you wrap your head around that?
Yeah.
And part of that is by bringing an array of Holocaust survivors who were very fortunate to be able to learn from, who have a variety of experiences. Not everybody went through Auschwitz. Some children were hidden. Not everyone survived the depths of a death or labor camp. Some were able to flee, but what was their story? What were the complications and the situations that they encountered with grit and tenacity and courage that demonstrate to us, no matter what the situation, we all have agency. We can make personal choice.
Yes.
And the last thing I'll say about this is, in this moment in our history, and I think it's human nature, we rush to compare. It's just like insert. And we work really hard at the museum to try to dissuade people from making direct comparisons, because not only is it not just like, it eliminates this possibility that we have choices, that we all have a role to play. We don't have to repeat history. We can look at what has happened and use it to make informed choices about the future that we want to have.
Good. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your work. It's a powerful place, boy. Thank you for your work. Talk about a purpose, huh? Congratulations. Thank you. And Scott, I guess we'll move. I saw your slides are very happy slides. And, I think that in the nonprofit world, we can be happy because we're doing purposeful and good work. And this notion that we kind of hang our heads and say, oh, shucks. Hey, man, you're doing good stuff. You're living a good life. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, if I may. And let me try something just a little bit different. I'm going to repeat the question to you. Then if you'd like, you can go right into a presentation, a small presentation and some slides. Would that be okay?
Sure.
So I'll repeat the question, then we'll go to the slides. And then Amy's got a few additional comments, and Lauren, and then we'll open it up. How's that sound, everybody? Okay. Okay. So Scott, let me just repeat the question for you. The question is this: what comes to mind when you think about storytelling for social good? And then if you'd like to go into your presentation from there, that would be good. And thank you for being here. And I love your slides. They're happy slides. So that's good.
Thank you. The first thing that comes to mind when I think about social good is before you have a conversation about what to make, you have to align on the definition of social good, because social good for one population could actually not be very beneficial or could even be dangerous for another one. There's a common phrase in the humanitarian community, which we at Sesame do a lot of work with, which is do no harm. And oftentimes we have great intentions. And I'll give an example. This morning, we're working on an animated series designed to go global, but it first has to serve the Rohingya refugees living in Bangladesh. And we did a survey of different playgrounds around the world, because learning through play is a big part of this. And most playgrounds around the world have tires, recycled tires, which is a great way to show that you can take things from your community without spending a lot of money or any money and repurpose them for a play setting. And our advisors were on board with that in many of the countries that were looking at this content, but in the Rohingya context and in parts of Africa, advisors said, yes, our playgrounds have tires, but we have a terrible problem with mosquito infestations. They're breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and they're breeding grounds for dangerous animals like snakes. So we don't want to model children playing on that. And that is excellent advice, but it's something that we might not have arrived at if we hadn't done our due diligence and really worked with advisors. So I'll jump in. I mean, who doesn't love PowerPoint slides, right? But I'll jump in and just share a little bit. I was being facetious, as I hope everyone knows. So I oversee all of the international work that Sesame Workshop does. We're a nonprofit, and our mission is to help children grow smarter and stronger and kinder. And a few of the things we're working on, this has a lot of information you don't need to know, but this show is designed to help displaced children and families from the Syrian refugee crisis. And this was funded by the MacArthur Foundation and the Lego Foundation to help us bring early childhood education to the region. And we created these three Muppets that you see on the left, Basma, Jad, and Masuza, the baby goat, because we wanted to create locally relevant characters that could also travel, because we're a nonprofit. And so as we tell stories that are heavily researched and heavily vetted, we want to try to leverage those to share them in other contexts, because as a nonprofit, we just don't have a whole lot of money to spend on making new content. So we try to leverage them. So we chose to make them monsters, meaning they don't wear clothes. They're monsters like Cookie Monster or Elmo. And Mazuza, the baby goat, allows us to offer a mischievous little character who is nonverbal, who can be kind of a proxy for a younger sibling, so that Basma and Jad, who are both around age 6, they have the opportunity to model how to be nurturers to a younger sibling or a pet or a friend. This is them at work. I'll speed through these just to give a sense of the kind of stuff we do. For the Rohingya context, there are hundreds of thousands of children and families living in camps in Bangladesh. And we designed these two Muppets to help them see themselves reflected. And just harkening back, Eddie, to what we were talking about at the top,
Sure.
the reason we created Muppets were not just because Sesame uses Muppets and is famous for Muppets, but in fact, as we looked into showing videos of actual Rohingya children on screen that we would share using Pico projectors in the camps, which don't have electricity, so we have to be inventive about how to share the media content. We looked into it and we realized that we would not be responsible to the children in the community if we showed them on big screens, because it might put them at risk. There are rumors, there's gossip churning after camera crews leave. They think that you might be scouting for children you might abduct, or you might be trying to convert them to a religion. So we use Muppets in this context to be proxies for children and to help children see themselves. So these costumes are derived from photos of children that I and my colleagues met in Bangladesh in the Rohingya refugee camps. And then in Takalani Sesame, which is a show that's been on in South Africa for about 20 years, we have monsters, although Moshe, the tall one, is technically a meerkat. He's much larger than a typical meerkat. But again, this allows us to go a little overboard with the stories we tell. It allows us to be a little bigger than life. So Zeekway, that aqua-colored character there, he's a larger than life Muppet who can get away with doing some funny, silly things that if we had an adult or a grown-up character doing in human form might seem a little too close to negative modeling or too close to being absurd. So Muppets afford us that ability as we're telling stories for the social good to add humor and silliness and make children want to meet them in real life.
Thanks so much.
That's it.
You inspire my I want to call you my colleague, and we don't know each other, but I want to be friends with you because you're really cool. You're really cool. So thank you very much. And Amy, if I may, how about if we go, if you're okay, Amy, I know you had a brief presentation that you were kind enough to put together for us, I think. And then Lauren, may we do those? Would that be okay?
Sure, and you know, I'm going to be really brief because I want to answer questions and make this useful to folks who are joining. So, but I thought that I would just start by giving just a little context on how we try to meet the needs of the moment. So this is the homepage right now for the museum, and our goal is always to offer context to this history that is moving further and further into the past. It's not a Jewish history, it's a human history, and there are lessons that are timely and timeless. So what you can see here is a really disturbing image that happened at the Capitol. And what we want to be able to show is there's a context for the anti-Semitism and hate that you're seeing today. And so, of course, it's not working. So when you click on that disturbing image, this is now going to bring you to our Holocaust Encyclopedia, and you're now within the middle of one article that shows you the origins of some of the symbols. And I think these two images and these two web pages really typify what our goal as an educator and a memorial is, and those are our core functions. We want to help you understand the past so you can take that information and make informed choices about the future that you want to have. And that extends to contemporary atrocities and genocide. And so we also are providing a lot of content that gives you that through line of this history and why we need to pay attention to the plight of the Rohingya. And this is an online exhibition that introduces you to individuals who help humanize what this community is facing, and also give you some background and context to understand the culture and the events that led to it. People don't wake up every day thinking about the Holocaust. And so we're always trying to find the right moments to connect with what they're thinking and make the history relevant to today. And so this is a program, I regret we can't look at video because I think this is like the antithesis of dynamic programming, but this is the title slide for the program. But this was a program that we were able to put together right after the attack on the Capitol. But the truth is we were looking at what the environment has been in the last year or so and thinking about what the fall might look like. This was a program that we had ready to go at a moment's notice, and it was a live conversation. Since the museum closed due to COVID, digital has become everything. There are educators all across the country who are needing to connect with their students, no matter what their learning environment is like, with relevant content. And so we have a lot online, but engagement moments through Facebook Live have been an important vehicle for us to meet the conversation where it is, right time, right audience, right content. And in that context, we're also building community. So I already see that the Q&As and the chats are starting to pop up, and we are trying to make the most of the digital platform that we have right now to reach a global audience, and bringing content to them that helps them just have a clearer understanding of this complex history. You know, there are only 2 moments truly in the national calendar when Holocaust remembrance is present. And so we use every opportunity then to make it relevant.
Thank you so much, Amy. And Lauren, if you would be next, please. I want to ask the folks if you'd be kind enough, please, to make sure that you drop your questions into the chat, and we'll get to those relatively quickly. A quick comment. Thank you so much for your comments. And what's great about it is the visuals. Aren't visuals powerful? Aren't they really something? I was thinking about Scott's visuals and your visuals. And oftentimes we assume that the people with whom we're working are literate and can read or share the same language, and they may not. And so the visuals are especially powerful, I think. And thank you very much for sharing those. Lauren, if we made to you, and then we're going to make sure that we get to some of the questions in the Q&A. Thank you for, they're coming in, and thank you for sharing those. Yes.
Totally. So I did not make slides, so I'm going to share my web browser. It's been a crazy work week. So backing up a little bit, this is my cat. Her name is Maya, and she was born with a chromosome abnormality. We adopted her 3 years ago, and her story just went everywhere. We have no idea how, but because of that, people asked us to make an Instagram. So we did, and then it just kept growing. I thought it was going to be like, we'll post twice and forget about it. And now it's a huge, huge part of my everyday. So Maya has a chromosome abnormality. I'll show you. And you can see she looks a little different. She's got some googly eyes, squished face. We have another cat as well, whose name is Dragon, and she is paralyzed in her back 2 legs. And our platform, we had this platform, and we started sharing it. We started telling people, like, look, we have 2 disabled animals and they're doing totally fine. And through that, like our cat's story is everywhere. We were on the news in like Russia. We don't even find out about this stuff. It just, people tell us. I don't know. But because we had this platform, we thought we want to do something more with it. We've been spreading disability awareness through this platform for the past 3 years. But as of a little less than a year ago, we started All Worthy. So under the premise of we are all worthy of being included, we have created this nonprofit as a means of helping kids and grownups to accept one another, and just starting the conversation about disability and inclusion. We have children's books. We have like t-shirts just saying like things like ask me about my disability. Our book is in classrooms all over the place, and it's just been just a really cool way of bringing, you know, our pets and our passions together. Yes. And really making an impact. So far we've raised over $20,000 for causes, for disability inclusion causes around the world. Again, we're very new. We just got our 501c3 status a couple months ago and just started fundraising. So that's what I do as more of a passion project. And then super quick, I'll show you what I do for my real job, which is copywriting and brand development for cause-driven brands. So this is Outshine Labels. They are a marketplace for the disability community, kind of like how you'll get customing shirts, or Bonfire, how it's like fundraising through the sales of items. Together, we've kind of developed their whole story, and they are sharing just children's stories around the world with different disabilities, helping bring awareness and inclusion and helping their families raise money. There's been this story out of these 2 twins, Levi and Laney, who were in a horrible drowning accident, and they're doing okay. Levi has recently woken up, but he's still going through all of those medical treatments, and through this platform there, and just by sharing their story, they're raising thousands and thousands of dollars for Levi's medical treatment. So it's really incredible the impact we can have. Team Impact is another nonprofit I've worked with, again, in the kids world, but there's also non-kids driven brands. This is an example. It's a, it's like soap for toilet paper to make your own wet wipe, because wet wipes are really bad for the environment. So there's ways to tell cause-driven stories that aren't just sad stories, that aren't just in one realm of work. It's not just nonprofits. And yeah, that's really quickly what I do.
Thanks so much, Lauren. It's great to hear from you. Please thank Maya and Levi too for their participation in your comments. You know, I'd like to move forward if we may, you know, and I'm just thinking that, you know, what was so interesting about your presentation, Levi, and the others to an extent, is you use a story to illustrate a larger point, right? And that really, really works so very well. Let me, if I may, I'm going to turn to some of the questions. And panelists, we could probably, if you were billing us, you could bill us a lot of money every hour and we could hang around here till midnight because there's so much to learn. But I'm going to ask you respectfully, and I'll try to not to butt out of this, to give a relatively brief answer, and let's see if we can make it through some of these questions. May we do that? Is that okay with you all? If we take that approach? The first question is a really interesting one. It's timely. It's one that you and I spoke about yesterday, Amy. Just a very brief comment on this first question, or the question that's at the bottom. What role can social media play in storytelling for social good? A quick thought on that. What role can social media play in storytelling for social good? Quick thought.
In a quick bite, in a quick digestible moment, humanizing a problem and a solution.
Thank you so much. And Lauren?
I mean,
sorry, when you're agreeing, I agree too.
Everything I do has been so focused on social. For us, it's more, well, yes, humanizing the issue, but also building a community and sparking those conversations in a place, meeting people where they already are.
Yes, thank you. And Scott?
Well, a few days ago, a TikTok meme about Big Bird reaching out to all of his cousins went viral. And that is a great indication of how social media can help raise awareness. And now there are hopefully millions of people who now know that Sesame does international work. And then in turn, that might lead to greater opportunities for funding or for programs getting implemented into local settings.
Thanks so much. I'm going to push right ahead, if I may, with the premise that you all could come to any of the classes I teach and talk to the whole class about these questions. So forgive me for going quickly, but we want to get a kaleidoscopic overview of your life and your work, and that's what I'm thinking. Here's the next question. Scott, maybe we'll ask you to pick this one up first, if I may, and then we'll go to Lauren and Amy, if that's okay. So Scott, in a minute, here's the question. As a person in comm interested in nonprofit, how can I put myself out there to stand out in nonprofit interviews / the hiring process? Scott, and then we'll go to Amy and Lauren.
Well, I think the desire to work in the nonprofit space, if you're coming from a media background, which you are if you're coming from comm, the desire to work in nonprofit is a big deal, because when I interview people, knowing that they've expressed interest, but also a history, like they can back it up with, look, since this date, I've been involved in some volunteering or some nonprofit social causes. That helps because you're backing it up with evidence. And I would say a lot of nonprofits need really sophisticated skill sets that they can't afford. And so if you're able to offer multiple skills, or if you go in knowing that you might not be making as much money as somewhere else, but you acknowledge that might make an interviewer breathe a little bit easier and actually not do the whole thing of, oh, they'll never take the job, we can't afford them. Because that's the thing.
Great wisdom. Thanks so much, Scott. Amy?
I think the first step is to zero in on, you know, what are the issues that you care most about? To Scott's point, nonprofits often don't have a lot of resources. And so the sophistication they need in candidates is also someone who understands their issue. And especially in advocacy, having that depth of information and background on the topic ensures that you can take the communication just a little further, a little faster. You're not starting from square one. The other thing I would say is, if you have a chance, if you're currently studying, internships, I know this sounds so basic, but the more skills that you can get under your belt in the context of doing the work, I just think it grounds everything, and it gives you just a much greater sense of pace and how to operate in that environment effectively.
Thanks so much. And can you all see these Q&A? Can you see the questions? Amy, there's a question from Tracy Kin that I'm gonna ask you to answer next because it's directed to you, but let's hear Lauren's thoughts on this, and then we can open it up a little bit more. Thank you for being brief too and educating us. Yes, please. So we'll get right back to that question from Tracy for you, Amy, and then Lauren, please, your comments on this.
What everybody else said, I think I was going to say internships as well. I think they're a great way to learn. I mean, I know our nonprofit is always happy to take interns because we can afford them, but also because we know that they're passionate about learning and about trying new things and about, the cause. So
Good.
definitely intern.
Thanks so much. And Tracy, you want to handle that question? I'm sorry, let me just see. I'm sorry, Amy, my fault. Amy is able to bring some of these programs to schools, the relevancy of, say, the rise of extremist groups. So it is important to teach children. Would you have a quick thought on that?
Sure. So within the museum, I sit in marketing and communications, and I'm really big on analogies. I feel like I sit as the welcome mat. I'm here to bring you into the institution. We have an entire department, a center that develops pedagogically sound curriculum. And the programs that I referenced are barely scratching the surface of content that teachers can avail themselves of. And so for our Facebook program, every other Wednesday, 9 a.m. Eastern time, the museum's Facebook Live program, Stay Connected Facebook Live, explores these topics. And then we're always pointing to the resources within our site, Holocaust Encyclopedia article, a collection, because primary artifacts are really those best storytellers for us. So if you check out the site, there's lots of content, and there's even, if you are an educator or you're interested in connecting, your community's educators with the museum, there are even training conferences to help teachers right size how to bring this history forward to their community.
Wonderful.
High school primarily.
I bet you find purpose in that work, don't you?
I do, and to me, the greatest opportunity that I feel I've gotten in working at the museum is every day I get a chance to learn more. I feel so fortunate. I had grandparents well into my adult years, and boy, do I wish I could talk to them about what they lived through and they experienced. And so the opportunity every day to meet really smart people, some of whom are what we call 2G, second generation. They had a parent, 3G, a grandparent. But some people come to this history having no personal connection. But the more time you spend with it, you realize the relevance of it. And it makes you that much more appreciative of living in a society where, this is not a political statement. It's we value our freedoms, and we value in a liberal democracy, this idea of respect and the dignity of all individuals. And that is certainly something that we can take as, warning from this history, that didn't exist.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to open up the next question to everybody and see if anybody wants to give this one a tackle. It's from Rusi. Rusi is in my class. She's much smarter than I am. But one of the things I have to deal with at COM is being the best looking professor in the university. And so that's just what I have to deal with. And so I just wanted to share that little thing they have to work with. Being facetious there, of course, but let me move to Rusi. For Lauren, Amy, and Scott, I really like your presentations, and I think you are doing really meaningful, important, and I think you've been important and cool. I have a question for Scott. Doing your work at the local community, do you ever encounter any pushbacks from local government or the people? How would you handle these situations? Thanks so much. Scott, I guess that would be geared toward you, please.
Yeah, it's a great question. We do get a lot of questions. I think years ago when Sesame was starting out in regions, there was more of a fear of colonialism, a fear of being, imperialistic with American values. So really, I think the things that we do are the same things that we should all do as humans, which is listen more, work with local advisors and local experts and have them kind of guide the way. We have our North Star as an organization of what our values are. And sometimes those values are not received by everyone in a community. So for example, gender equity, giving girls and boys an equal chance to play together. So in some communities around the world, that is not as well received. And we have to make choices about what we're willing to kind of compromise on. And it helps to just know what your identity is as an organization.
Thank you so much, Scott. Really good. Lauren, if I may, I'm going to put this question to you, please. I know that you're involved with branding, and that's one of your expertise areas. Here's the question from Julia, the great Julia. How has your role and the role of storytelling for social good in general changed? Oh, no, I'm on the wrong one. Sorry, here's the other one. Here's the question. It's from Jason. Should brands participate in their own social good initiatives, or would their resources be better spent aligning with established nonprofits? You've got expertise in this area. What do you have to? What are your thoughts on that?
Good question. So as someone who has worked in bigger agencies, this comes up all the time. I would say it depends on who the brand is and if the cause makes sense for them and if they can do it authentically. Because if it's not going to come off as authentic and if it's not being done for the right reasons, people aren't going to reflect well. Like it's just not going to work out the way you want. Partnering with an organization or better established nonprofit is also always a great idea, because then you're boosting an organization versus trying to do something all on your own. But you're getting them as a resource. They're the experts. You don't have to do that part. So it really depends.
Okay, thanks so much. It's interesting. Amy, you and I spoke yesterday and you brought up the notion of COVID and how that's, I believe the word was radically changing how you practice as a communication manager and by extension a storyteller. So maybe this would be a good question for you. This one's from Julia. Here it is. Okay. How has your role and the role of storytelling for social good in general changed during the pandemic? What changes do you see carrying on post-pandemic?
So it has radically transformed the way we approach education. I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. It was incredibly disruptive to schools how teachers are educating. They needed resources that were easy to adapt, would be engaging enough to keep a student's attention in a shorter period of time when we're trapped in a box, and still be meaningful. And there's actually a parallel to what I'm talking about now and meeting teachers' needs with everything that Scott and Lauren just talked about with understanding local needs and voices. You can't possibly create effective content or an engagement effort without talking and spending time with the audience you're trying to reach. Without understanding what a teacher needs in the content that the museum has to offer, the content falls the risk of falling flat. Similarly, if a large corporation wants to initiate a corporate philanthropy program, but really doesn't have a grounding in that and chooses to go it alone without a nonprofit, they run the risk of, at worst, wasting money, at best, wasting money, at worst, setting the issue back. And Scott made the exact same point, that unless you're taking into those account those local nuances and the cultural, unique aspects of culture and cultural understanding, it's for naught. It really comes back to right audience, right time, and right content. And in terms of COVID, we all need to just get used to our viewing habits being different, our anxiety levels being high. When I originally started my position, it was a mix of in-place programs in community centers and synagogues and universities, and some digital. And colleagues were very happy getting people together for little events. I don't know that we're going to be getting back together very soon. It's all digital now, and I think it's really changed the way people are consuming content, and we need to continually think about what, not just the technology fixes, but how we adjust presenting the content to meet those new mindsets.
Well, I think we're doing really, really well. We've just got about 5 minutes left, and thank you for that response. Y'all are just great. I mean, I just want to take you all out to dinner, and I'm Scott's friend, Lauren, Amy, you're my friend, your cat, I'm friends with a cat, everything, the whole thing. So as we move forward, let me ask you kind of a sort of a final question. But before I do, I want to make sure I thank 3 people. Number 1, Allison Hoyt, who's my great colleague here at Boston University. Number 2, we want to make sure that we thank Emma Gillian, who's at Boston University, who put this together for us. And of course, the dean for taking some time to spend with us and introduce us and make us all feel important, because an important person started us off, as are Allison and Emma. With that said, here's my final question. And are we okay if we go maybe 2 minutes over or 3 minutes over? Is that okay, Allison, or do we cut off at 4?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so we want to be conscious of all your time, but let me ask you this. It doesn't really matter. Well, I'll just be dictatorial here. Let me start with Scott and Lauren and Amy, okay? We'll go that way. And the final question is this. It's a 2-part question. One piece of advice that you would give to aspiring nonprofit professionals, that may be people who are in the midst of their career, or people such as the students with whom I have the privilege of working who are starting their career. So number 1, what piece of advice? And number 2, what do you think we must know that we did not cover today? So number 1, what piece of advice would you have? And number 2, what is something that we must know that we did not cover today? And then we'll finish up for today. Scott, are you okay going first with that?
Sure, but I'm going to vamp a little bit because those are tough ones. I would say that the advice I'd give is be the most authentic person you can be from your own backgrounds and experiences. Everyone has experiences that are going to help other people. And I think sometimes in people's 20s and 30s, they're sometimes chasing after a carrot that they think is like, the golden carrot. That isn't so much about recognizing their own personal experiences and what they can offer. So look inside yourself and see what can you offer based on your lived experience and not just the person you want to become. And then that will help other people. And I guess that's my, I think the second part was advice. What was the second part?
The second part was something that we must know. In other words, Downs talked way too much. The jokes were no good. And
I don't agree with any of that.
Well, thank you.
You've been great. I would say the thing that I wish I knew when I was in comm was that people may care about you a lot in the workplace, but nobody is responsible for figuring out what your path is going to be. Your boss and your manager, they don't know, they can't read your mind. They don't know where you want to go in your life. So share that with them and find mentors. Hopefully it's your manager, hopefully it's coworkers, and tell them where you want to go. And most people really will help you get there, but they can't read your mind.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I look at your career and I think the advice is most valuable, and I suspect some of it you've integrated into your own life. So thank you so much, Scott. I think we'll go to Amy and then we'll finish up with Lauren, and then we'll have to leave, unfortunately.
I had just amazing professors while I was at BU, and one of them gave us advice in JO201. Mark Lassesi said, a good journalist knows a little bit about a lot of things. And at the time, I thought that meant you needed to race around. I didn't really grasp that. And over time, I've come to realize that it's about knowing what my role is, but something you said early on in the presentation, Professor Downs, which is, confidence, but vulnerability.
Yes.
I think it's this,
Yes.
a good journalist is a listener, but at the same time is leaning in with confidence to approach every problem confident they're going to find a solution and not feeling overwhelmed by it. And I don't think that just applies to journalism. I think it applies to how I approach my work and learning every day. And I think it's a great way to show up in life. And I'm so sorry.
Sure, that's okay. The second part is something that we must know that we didn't get to today. There's probably a lot we must know, but just something at the top of your head.
Well, the one point I wanted to make earlier just about this history, and that I think, again, gets to the environment that we're in right now. The perpetrators at the time were not monsters. They were human beings. And whether they were Nazi officers or neighbors, everyone had different motivations for the actions that they took. And I think that's still present today. Taking the time to get to know people, it's about what Lauren said, understanding and having empathy. We're just people. And if we rush to judgment, if we plow ahead without taking time to listen, you run the risk of flattening people. And we're humans. Nazis were humans. The people at the Capitol are humans. And we have to find a way to also transfer that into the way we communicate about really complex topics. They are human issues, and we can't afford to flatten them.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And we'll finish up, please.
Yeah, I mean, as far as advice goes, I would say just do what you're passionate about. I didn't think that I would end up working with nonprofits. I was always like, oh, I'll just volunteer on the side. I can't afford to go work for a nonprofit right after college. And that was the only reason I didn't go work for a nonprofit after college. So just being able to really know what's important to you and know that there is an opportunity out there that you'll find that you can do what you're passionate about.
Good. And is there any piece that you wanted to make sure that we mentioned that we didn't mention, Lauren?
No, I've been answering a couple questions in the Q&A thing.
Well, I'm gonna cheat a little bit, and I'm gonna make sure that y'all are great folks, and thank you for your work. There's the rule of 3 that we talk about. When you present things in 3, people cognitively tend to remember them. You probably know that. So I'm going to try that. The first rule of 3 I'm going to talk about is that we have another presentation coming up next week. And I want to make sure you know that the next Com Talk is titled Black, Female, and Funny. 2 women discuss writing comedy for TV on February 17th. From 3 to 4, and we can shut off the screen if it's okay, if you don't mind, the screen sharing. Thank you. So again, one more time, the next Com Talk is titled Black, Female, and Funny. 2 women discuss writing comedy for television, and that will be February 17th from 3 to 4. So we hope we see you all there. That's number 1. Number 2 is that I just want to to let you know that I don't know, Com should be just very proud of you for your work. And I write recommendations sometimes, and once in a while I say, this is a student in whom you will take great pride as an alum. And I take great pride having you be associated with a place that gives me my paycheck. So thank you all very much. And the third thing that I want to make sure is to give you a standing ovation. And thank you all for coming, and thank you for your work. And as I say to my students sometimes, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, all.
Thank you.